That might not be good. All right. Well, I'm sorry, folks. If you're listening online, you missed out on the introduction, but you'll get all of this next time again, probably. All right. So we're in Matthew 8, and we were looking at the miracles which really authenticated not only Jesus as Messiah, but also showed that he was the one that could bring in the kind of world that we see described in the millennial kingdom, the messianic kingdom. And so let's go ahead and have somebody read 8:1 through 4.
When Jesus came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him. And a leper came to him and bowed down before him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, "I am willing, be cleansed." And immediately the leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, "See that you tell no one, but go show yourself to the priest and present the offering that Moses commanded as a testimony to them."
All right, there's a lot of things going on here that are important. Remember, at this point, Jesus has not had a real good response from the Jews. We saw that from the time he was born on. A lot of questioning. Remember in Matthew 3, when he was being baptized, he had gone down there, and remember, before his baptism, the Pharisees showed up, and John said, "Wait a minute, who warned you, you vipers, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come?" In other words, the wrath that will come before the kingdom comes in. That's the tribulation period, which the Old Testament talks about extensively, by the way. And so the Jews had not been excited about Jesus. They had plotted to kill him from very early on because of what was at stake from them. And so it's interesting what Matthew does is Matthew, here starting right after the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 8, he deals with people that your normal average Jew would not have a lot to do with, or at least would think was maybe a lower class of person. They certainly weren't male Jews, which was thought to be the ultimate. If you want to be favored by God, you had to be a Jew and you had to be a male. Talk about women having a low place. And of course, we see scripturally Jesus raising that and Paul raising that. The New Testament church age, the value of women were raised to equality. Paul wrote and said, there's no Jew or Gentile, slave or free, male or female in Christ. And so we see that's why Christianity in societies raised the value of women as opposed to most societies. That's a side note. What we see here, by the way, in verse 1, most people point this out, and in the language you can see this. Actually, verse 1 of chapter 8 should be the last verse in chapter 7. When Jesus came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him, period. And then in verse 2, we start this new topic of the healing. And so he said, and a leper came to him and bowed down before him. Now, this could be adoration. It's not sure, but it seems to be. It seems to be that this leper has recognized who Jesus is and is bowing down in adoration to him and worship to him in submission to him. But I want you to think about in first century Judaism, the state of a leper. How many of you have seen, what's the name of it? The Roman movie with the guy that had the the family that was lepers? The old movie. This is an old movie. What is the name of it? It's not coming to me. Oh my goodness. Ben-Hur. Ben-Hur. Oh my goodness, I'm getting to have a senior moment there. How many of you have seen Ben-Hur?
I have, but I don't remember that part.
Oh my goodness. Now of course, Ben-Hur, he's a Jewish guy. Lives in Jerusalem, very wealthy Jewish family. And the oddest thing happens. They're watching the proconsul or some Roman authority coming into Jerusalem, and a tile falls off the roof, and it scares the horse, and this, that, and the other happens, and Ben-Hur gets arrested. He ends up on a boat, rowing. Y'all remember this? Coming back? Get your Netflix out and pull up Ben-Hur, okay? And the Ben-Hur, it's not just watching a movie, but a lot of the historical things. Gives you a lot of flavor of first century Judaism. And so the reason why I point that out is that the lepers generally lived apart. You know, they were supposed to stay apart. You'll watch in this movie, and it's very historically accurate. They tried to get close to people. People would pick up stones and throw at them because leprosy was contagious, and there was no cure. And so a leper it was one of the lowest things you could be. And as you will see in this movie, the families would have to bring them food, and they would put the food out. You know, the families that love their family enough, you know, their leprous family enough, they would bring food, and they would put it in a certain place, and then they would leave. They would walk away, and then the lepers would come and get the food, so there wouldn't be any contagion spread. And so, yes.
I think it's important that Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him.
Hey, there's no doubt about that, Gene. You are right on the money. You know, here is a class of people that the average Jew thought was, you know, the scum of the earth. You know, they're dead. We write them off. And certainly didn't have convalescent homes or anything like we would have to try to care for them. And here Jesus was. This guy comes and drops down, specifically says, bowed down before him. And as Gene said, could Jesus have said, "You're healed"?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Jesus actually could have backed up and, whoa, okay, buddy, you're healed.
And then touched him.
But no, there is tremendous significance, as Gene said. And why would he do that? Why was that important for the Jewish people to see?
Show you the power of the disease.
Absolutely. What's disease to the one who spoke the world into existence? What's disease to the Messiah who will end all disease during the millennial kingdom? I mean, that's evidence of who he is. And so this showed that Jesus had authority to heal. It showed that he was not, nobody was a social outcast to Jesus. Now we're gonna look later at the fact that he had some interaction with some Gentiles where he actually pointed out that he wasn't sent to minister to them, he was sent to minister to the Jews. And we're going to talk about why he said that and why that was accurate, but what was going on there. All right? And it's very important, this whole kingdom idea. And so lepers were social outcasts, but yet Jesus loved this man. He reached out and touched this man. And the faith this guy had, Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean. There wasn't any question. Now, I'm sure that at this point, because we know chronologically some things had already happened, some healing had already occurred, I'm sure that he had seen Jesus heal people. Whether I don't remember chronologically whether a leper had been healed yet or not, but maybe not. But he was healing everybody, and so this leper had the faith to believe this man can heal me if he wants to.
It says that he was healing all diseases.
Yes, absolutely, and all people. One of the things you'll read in that article I gave you is that many theologians have pointed out that, you know, when we're reading this, you will note that you know, the gospel writers give you a snapshot of one person that he healed or a couple of people that he healed, and then it says he healed all the other people that were there. You know, if we had an account of every person that Jesus and then the apostles who were given that power to go and do healed, as one theologian pointed out, in the area of Galilee, probably illness as we know it was totally eliminated for a while. Isn't that amazing? You would think at that point something would go, duh, this is our Messiah. This is unique. This hadn't happened before, you know. And so, and notice he says, I am willing to be cleansed. And one of the things that Matthew does over and over and over, unless the context indicates it without him saying it, is he said, immediately his leprosy was cleansed. There wasn't a delay. There wasn't, I've told you this story before. When we were in Bulgaria and Eastern Europe, there was one of these faith healers came through. And unfortunately, we were working at that time with a Pentecostal church. And they invited the guy in, you know. And anyway, they had this big meeting, you know, in this big hall. Everything has to be big and public, you know. And so the daughter of the pastor of the church had glasses. She was probably, I'm going to guess she was 12, 13 years old, something like that. It was so sad. Of course, we didn't go. We rebelled as missionaries. We knew it was a bunch of hogwash, if you will. And so anyway, for weeks, that precious child walked around doing this. You know why? Because the guy said that after he left, sometimes healing takes several days. Is that what we see here? Is that what we see in Jesus' ministry anywhere? I mean, even the situation where he put the salve, I mean, is it the salve, or maybe you put the clay or whatever? You know, there was kind of a two-stage deal, which is kind of unique in Jesus' ministry, and there's obviously a reason for that. Even in that, it was a very brief period of time from beginning to end. No, when Jesus healed, he healed because he was the creator. He didn't have any barrier to heal somebody.
It also had to be that some of them had to go and wash.
Yes.
And Naaman had to go dip in the filthy
Right.
Jordan River. You know, they had to
That's an
show
obedience.
It's a step of faith, yes. Because remember, Naaman said, don't we have, I mean, he was Aramean. You know, we have got all these beautiful rivers up there, and you got this little nasty Jordan River, or wherever he was supposed to go. I mean, if that's going to heal me, I'll go back to my country. It was an obedience thing. And so it's interesting you bring that up, because what's interesting about this is then he tells this guy, see that you tell no one. Now we've seen that. We saw that in Mark, remember? Which was, a different perspective. Most people believe Mark was probably the first gospel written. And obviously it was probably Mark probably served more as a putter together and recorder of the thoughts of Peter in his gospel. But many times he recorded that Jesus said, don't tell anybody this happened. And probably the reason is that every time somebody told somebody, then he got 1,000 more people, wanting him. I mean, he just, and his goal was not just to do miracles. His goal was to offer the kingdom to Israel. And then eventually to go to the cross and die after being rejected. But it can be a logistic thing. Remember, sometimes on the beach, there'd be so many people, he'd have to get in the boat, remember, and get away from them so he could talk to all of them. So it's a logistic thing. But what he did tell him, which is important here, he says, and Jesus said to him, see that you tell no one, but go show yourself to the priest and present the offerings that Moses commanded as a testimony to them. If you want to go back and see what the Mosaic Law said about the sacrifices for the person that was healed from leprosy, that's in Leviticus 14. You can go back and look at that if you'd like. But that's what he's talking about. In other words, remember, this is Old Testament. Remember, Old Testament simply means Mosaic Law. That's what it means. And old, our phrases old and new come from the fact that when Jeremiah talked about the new covenant, he said, not like the old covenant. That's covenant, testament, contract, whatever you want to call it, and the new. So we're under the old covenant here. Jesus he fulfilled the old covenant, and he went. What this was, not only was obedience to the Mosaic Law, but it was also a significant witness to the priests. Remember, this guy's got to go to Jerusalem, and he's got to present the sacrifices before the priests. And the priests, if you go back and look at that section about the bald-headed guys and the guys with the shiny places on their head and shiny places on their body, all that description in Leviticus about leprosy and trying to keep it. Remember, it could even get in the contagion could actually get in the cement or something.
The walls.
Yeah, because and they say you find it, you tear it down, and so there's a lot of explanation. That's where you're reading and you go, because it's just not real exciting, But you have all this explanation. So they had to verify. Remember, the priests are the ones that isolated them. Talk about quarantine. They had to be quarantined. And they had to verify whether it was healed or whether it was or whether it wasn't. So that's still going on. This is the Mosaic Covenant. First century, Jesus heals this guy. He goes to Jerusalem. He's going to go to Jerusalem, and he's going to present himself before the priest and bring the sacrifice. And the priests have to look at it. And the priests are going to go, really? This was really leprosy, and he really doesn't have it anymore. And what's interesting is I did my study that didn't hit me is if you look at the history of the Bible, the last time somebody was healed was in the Old Testament, and it was Naaman that you mentioned. And then before that, Moses healed Miriam. Remember, Miriam was struck with leprosy because her and Aaron thought they were going to, why does Moses get to be leader? Almost like little kids, I guess. Why does our brother get to be leader? We're older. Whatever. They questioned his leadership, and God struck Miriam with leprosy. So way back there, that was the last time somebody was healed. Naaman was the last time somebody was healed of leprosy. You're talking about a significant miracle. I mean, I'm just trying to think here. Naaman, that would have been in the time of the kings. So you're talking about at least 1,000 years, over 1,000 years since somebody had been healed of leprosy. And all of a sudden, the priests were going to see this healing. Man, that should have been enough. Not if you're blind, as you're exactly right. So you know, I would have loved to have had one of our cameras like we have now on the wall when that priest was examining this guy and seeing his reaction and him going to one priest to another. Now, there are passages, if you'll remember, where it talks about, especially, I believe it's in the very beginning of the book of Acts, where it talks about the priests that were saved. On the day of Pentecost, or right after the day of Pentecost, there were a significant amount of priests saved. I mean, they had seen all of this. They had been in the temple when it was cleansed. They had been in the, they had seen a lot of stuff from Jesus. All right, so we've got the first miracle is from an untouchable. I mean, to a non-touchable or an untouchable. Then, if that's not bad enough, then a centurion shows up. Of course, a centurion was not a Jew, was he? A centurion was a Gentile. He was a Roman. Somebody who was head over 100 soldiers. So this is a guy that probably been in the military a while and moved up and become a centurion. And you remember later a centurion named Cornelius comes to know the Lord. What is that in Acts 13, something like that? And so this is a centurion, and the centurion comes and he says, very politely, Lord, the commentators pointed out, and I think they're right here, I don't think the centurion is recognizing the divinity of Christ, even though my Bible, the Lord is capitalized. I don't know if that's because it's at the beginning of his sentence or what, but this is, sometimes the word kurios or Lord was simply used in respect, like sir, like we'd say sir.
In one of the other Gospels, didn't it say that the centurion sent a servant?
Probably
Or
a
is
different.
that a different?
Yeah, I think this is the same thing. Yes, I think this is the same incident. Yes, absolutely. And saying, Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, fearfully tormented. And Jesus said to him, I will come and heal him. But the centurion said, Lord, I am not worthy of you to come under my roof. So here is a Gentile. And this Gentile is a significant man. I mean, he could be prideful and arrogant. First of all, the type of people who end up being soldiers like that generally are type A personalities, even today. Like my son. They got a little edge of cockiness, and you think of Shane, and you think of people like that. They're type A personalities. So he could easily be a little cocky and confident. He's centurion. I mean, this man has heard Christ. He's seen Christ. And one of the interesting things is he has observed about Christ that he is a man of authority just like he is. In other words, he's a man of authority over 100 people. When he tells a soldier, I mean, David can tell us in the military, I mean, how many times does your CO tell you to do something and you say, nah, I don't think I really don't have time to do that.
Yeah, right.
That's just not, I mean, if an army is going to function well, there has to be total submission to directives from the CO. And so, in the Roman army is one of the greatest armies that's ever existed in human history. And so, this man was used to not only, he said, I'm a man under authority. In other words, they tell me to do something, I get it done. And they tell me to do something, and it involves my 100 men, I say things and they do it. Whatever I tell them, they do it. So this man has taken this understanding, and obviously this is God working in him, a Gentile, not a son of Abraham, but a Gentile. And he's put this together. And here is a man who says, you're healed. And he's healed. And he's put it together. This man is under authority, and he has authority. He doesn't have to come to my home. All he has to do is say, it's done. And it's done. And look what Jesus says about the guy. He says in verse 10, now when Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who were following. Who were following him? Mostly Jews. Some Gentiles, but mostly Jews. He says, truly I say to you, I have not found such great faith with anyone in Israel. You got all the sons of Abraham, all those that think their end is because they're sons of Abraham. None of them have showed this kind of faith in me. And so you have an untouchable, and then you have a Gentile soldier. And it goes on, it says, I say to you that many will come from the east. Now listen to this. This is related to the kingdom, folks. This is kingdom stuff here. He says, truly I say to you, I have not found such great faith with anyone in Israel. I say to you, he's taken this moment to insert this. This is a Gentile who's put faith in the Messiah. He says, I say to you that many will come from the east, the beyond Israel, east of Jerusalem. Usually when you get directions in the Bible, it is related to Jerusalem. So east of Jerusalem, west of Jerusalem, and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. When that kingdom of heaven comes to earth, and the millennial kingdom is established, and he is reigning, there will be Gentiles involved in that, he's saying. But the sons of the kingdom, who's the sons of the kingdom? Who are the sons that the kingdom's promised to in the Old Testament? The Jews. He says the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And Jesus said to the centurion, go, it shall be done for you as you have believed. And the servant was healed that very moment. Because he was a man with authority. He had the authority of the Father. And when he spoke, it happened. It happened. So what Jesus is saying is, you sons of the kingdom, you Jews that I came to offer this kingdom to, that doesn't get you in. Being a son of the kingdom, a son of Abraham, that doesn't get you into the kingdom. What gets you into the kingdom is to believe like this Gentile. And that's why when the kingdom does come in, and the Old Testament saints are resurrected, because this is, if you go back to Daniel chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, it talks about the resurrection of the Old Testament saints. And I think it's Isaiah 26:19, it talks about resurrection. And so they're going to be resurrected, and they're going to receive the kingdom, of course, in their glorified bodies. They're going to receive the kingdom that was promised to them, and they will be involved in the reigning and ruling. Remember, later he says to the apostles, when I come into my kingdom, you guys are going to be on 12 thrones right next to me. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they'll all be there. We'll get to meet them. We'll be in glorified bodies as the church, and come back and help rule over Gentile nations during the millennial kingdom. And so this has got to shake them just a little bit. He's healed and untouchable. And right there in front of the sons of the kingdom, there's a display of faith that none of them have shown. None of them. Remember, the reason why Abraham's in is not just because he's Abraham, but because he believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness. It was faith. in the God who called him out of Ur of the Chaldees to go into a place he had never seen before, he'd never been before. He didn't know anything about the future, but he had the faith to believe, and he went. And of course, when he got there, God said, I'm going to give you this land, and I'm going to give it to you from now on. So what a incredible time that's going to be. Incredible time that's going to be. And that's why even in the Old Testament, if you look carefully, what you see of the kingdom is there will be Gentile nations and there will be Gentiles there. And those Gentiles will be there because they put faith in Christ, or put faith in God at that point. All right. So we're going to pick up there. Next time we're going to look at, he's healed an untouchable. He's healed a dog, a Gentile. And now he heals a woman. Ah! And yet all these masculine Jewish men who are sons of the kingdom, they're not responding in faith.
What's the world coming to you?
I know. And of course, in the end, he's going to say, I'm going to take the kingdom from this generation, and I'm going to give it to a generation of Jews who do recognize me as Messiah. And of course, we know that will come as a result of the purification that occurs in the tribulation and them coming to faith at the end of that. All right. Let's go ahead and have a word of prayer, and we'll close down and pick up right there with the healing of Peter's mother-in-law. Father, we come to you tonight, and we are grateful for your word in a day of uncertainty, in a day of anxiety, in a day of injustice, and in a day of lots of change in our life. Our security and our peace can be found in you. You are the one who spoke it all into existence, and you are the one who will bring in your kingdom. And you are the one who said that there is nothing that can separate us from you. You're the one that said, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God. You believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go, I will come again, and I will receive you unto myself. Help us, Lord, until that happens. Be actively sharing our faith with others. Be loving people, Lord, and reaching out to people who are not going to make it if that day comes and they've not put their faith and trust in you. Give us creative ways to love people, and give us opportunity, Lord, to share the gospel with those around us. We pray this in Jesus' name.